The trip was supposed to be a bonding experience, away from my dad and me, to reconnect after years of strained communication. My parents had divorced when I was 12, and while I had spent my weekends with him growing up, our relationship had grown distant as I got older. When he suggested a week-long vacation to the mountains, I hesitated. It felt strange, almost forced. But something in his voice, the way he said it might be our last chance for something like this, made me agree. We arrived at a secluded cabin nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by towering pines and a tranquil lake. The place was picturesque, almost too perfect. It was just the two of us. Dad had planned everything meticulously: hiking, fishing evenings by the fireplace. The first 2 days were uneventful but enjoyable. We shared stories, reminisced about the past, and laughed more than we had in years. It was nice, though. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling me. I caught him glancing at his phone more than usual, his brow furrowed as he typed messages, then quickly locked the screen whenever I walked by. On the third day, everything changed. We were sitting by the lake, the evening sun casting golden ripples across the water. I decided to ask him about the phone. "You've been glued to that thing," I said, trying to sound casual. "Who's so important during our father-daughter trip?" His reaction was immediate. He stiffened his eyes, darting to his phone before he forced a laugh. "Just work stuff," he said, waving it off. "You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. My dad had retired last year, and as far as I knew, he had no pressing commitments. Something was definitely off. Later that night, while he was showering, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A message preview lit up the screen. I didn't mean to look, at least that's what I told myself. But curiosity got the better of me. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Are you sure she won't find out?" My stomach dropped. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Who was this person, and what was my dad hiding? When he came out of the bathroom, I acted like nothing was wrong. But my mind was spinning, and I knew I had to get to the bottom of this. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. My dad was already outside, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. Staring at the lake, he looked calm. But I couldn't stop replaying that message in my head. I decided to wait and see what the day would bring. Maybe there was a simple explanation, something I was misunderstanding. But as we went about our planned activities, kayaking on the lake and hiking up a nearby trail, I noticed him glancing at his watch and checking his phone more frequently. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. "Are you expecting someone?" I asked as we unpacked our sandwiches by the lake. He blinked, caught off guard. "No, why?" "You just seem distracted," I said carefully. "You keep looking at your phone, like you're waiting for something to happen." He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, nothing like that. I'm just not used to being completely unplugged." I guess it was a weak excuse, but I didn't push further. Instead, I decided to do a little investigating on my own. That afternoon, while he went into town to pick up some groceries, I stayed back at the cabin. His phone was gone, but I started looking around, hoping to find some kind of clue. I knew it was invasive, but I couldn't help myself. In one of the drawers in his room, I found a small locked box. It was nothing fancy, just a plain wooden box with a tiny keyhole. My heart raced as I held it in my hands. What could he possibly be keeping in there? I was about to put it back when I heard the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. Panicked, I shoved the box back into the drawer and rushed back to my room. He came back inside, carrying bags of groceries and whistling a cheerful tune. If he suspected anything, he didn't show it. That evening, as we sat by the fire roasting marshmallows, he seemed more relaxed than he had all day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. And then, just as the stars began to dot the night sky, there was a knock at the door. The knock echoed through the quiet cabin, slicing through the crackling of the fire. My dad froze, his marshmallow dangling precariously from the stick. "Are you expecting someone?" I asked, my voice trembling. Despite my effort to sound calm, he didn't answer right away. Instead, he set the stick down and stood, smoothing his hands over his jeans as if preparing himself. "Stay here," he said finally, his tone firm but uneasy. Before I could protest, he walked to the door and opened it just wide enough to step outside. From where I sat, I couldn't see who it was, but I could hear murmured voices. A man and a woman, though their words were too low to make out. Curiosity nodded me. I moved quietly to the edge of the room. Peeking around the corner, the woman was tall and elegant, dressed in a way that seemed too polished for a rustic cabin in the woods. She was speaking to my dad in hushed tones, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I strained to hear, catching fragments of their conversation. "Can't keep hiding this forever. Not the right time. She deserves to know." My mind raced, trying to piece it together. Who was this woman, and what could they possibly be hiding from me? After a few minutes, the woman handed my dad a small envelope and glanced over his shoulder, her eyes meeting mine. "Who's that?" I called out, stepping fully into view. My dad turned sharply, his face pale. "This is Sarah," he stammered. "She's an old friend." Sarah offered me a polite smile, but there was something guarded in her eyes. "Nice to meet you," she said. Her tone too formal. I crossed my arms, refusing to be dismissed. "What's going on? Why are you two whispering like it's some big secret?" Dad sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's complicated," he said finally. "I'll explain everything later." "Why not now?" I demanded. Before he could answer, Sarah stepped in. "It's not my place to say," she said gently. "But your father and we've been trying to figure out the best way to handle this." Handle what? My voice rose, my frustration bubbling over. Sarah hesitated, then looked at my dad. "I think it's time," she said softly. Dad's shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the world had just been placed on them. He nodded slowly, gesturing for Sarah to come inside. As they sat across from me, I braced myself for whatever bombshell they were about to drop. The tension in the room was suffocating as we sat in silence, the only sound coming from the occasional crackle of the fire. My dad clasped his hands together, staring at them as if they held the answers. Sarah looked at him expectantly, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he took a deep breath and began. "Do you remember a few years ago when your mom and I divorced?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, unsure where this was going. "Well, there's something I never told you. Something I didn't think you needed to know at the time." He glanced at Sarah, who gave him an encouraging nod. "I wasn't completely honest with your mother," he admitted. "Before we separated, I had met someone else. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me." "You cheated on Mom." He winced. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It was complicated, and I thought I could fix things with your mother. But by the time I realized I couldn't, it was too late." I stared at him, the pieces slowly falling into place. "Sarah," I said, turning to the woman, "you're the someone else, aren't you?" Sarah nodded, her expression calm but apologetic. "Yes," she said. "But it wasn't what you think. Your dad and I, well, it didn't last long. We ended things before your parents divorced." "Then why are you here now?" I asked, my voice cracking. Sarah hesitated, her eyes looking to my dad. "He took over because there's more to the story," he said, after Sarah and I ended things. "We found out something unexpected." He reached for the envelope Sarah had handed him earlier and slid it across the table to me. My hands shook as I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a photo of a young boy no older than 4, with bright eyes and a mischievous smile. "That's Liam," my dad said quietly. I looked between him and Sarah, confusion giving way to realization. "You have a son," Sarah nodded. "We do," she said. "And we thought it was time for you to know." I stared at the photo, my emotions a whirlwind of anger, betrayal and disbelief. "So what does this mean?" I asked finally. "It means you have a half-brother," my dad said, "and I hope in time you'll understand why we kept it from you for so long." I didn't know what to say. The trip had gone from a chance to reconnect, to uncovering a secret that would change my family forever. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I didn't know if I could forgive my dad for what he had done, or accept this new reality. But one thing was certain: life as I knew it would never be the same.